Linda Eastburn here with Linda Eastburn YouTube channel with over 400 Bigfoot interviews. I welcome you to the show, and I'd like to ask everyone to please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it if you would do that. It doesn't cost anything, totally free, and it just helps us keep the channel going. Also, if you like the show, just share it with other people, get the word out. We have a good following, but we always appreciate it when more people join us and just keep the good channel going. So appreciate it. Today I have Brian Barber with me. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm glad you're here with us. So how did you become interested in Bigfoot?
Actually, since I was a little kid, it's just been part of my life. My grandma lived in Lake Ann in the mid 70s, and there was always a section of the woods where, don't go in there because, Bigfoot lives there. And being only about 5 years old, I knew it. I heard the term Bigfoot, but then it wasn't until In Search of with Leonard Nimoy came on the TV and they played the Patterson-Gimlin film. And, I pointed at the TV, Dad, is that what's at grandma's? Is that what at grandma's? And he says, well, yeah, but not that one. But yep, that's what's at grandma's. And so I grew up with it. And I didn't know it was supposed to be fake until I got into school when everybody made fun of me. But then I would grab any book I could see and still keep reading up on it.
What did your grandmother tell you back in those days about Bigfoot? Had she known people that saw it, or did she just speculate it was out there? What was her knowledge base?
They had an incident. My grandpa passed in 75, so it would have been 73, where they would find tracks occasionally, but on one particular night, she was home alone, and he was a dispatch deputy for Benzie County. And what had happened was it was late night, early morning, and we were having what we call heat lightning up here, where you get the lightning, but no rain or thunder. And the dog all of a sudden bolted under the bed, and her bed faced a window. And when a flash of lightning went off, there was a huge silhouette in the window. It completely blocked out the window. So she called my grandpa, and he brought himself and a couple of deputies with him. And they actually found the 17-inch tracks outside the window and were able to follow them back into the woods. They had the tracks cast and examined, and whatever made them, they were 17-inch, and whatever made them was over 500 pounds.
So, being a
So,
deputy dispatch, did he get calls about Bigfoot often?
yeah, in Benzie County, there's quite a bit of activity that goes on. And that happened in Lake Ann, which is in Benzie County. And as a matter of fact, there was a point in the 1980s where the sheriff, Zane Gray, uh, filed a report himself that he had seen one cross the road. And because of the timing, he got in as the most popular sheriff. But once he filed the Bigfoot report, because at that time it wasn't cool to be talking about it, he actually got voted out on a landslide because of the fact that his competitors used it as being incompetent that he saw, quote, Bigfoot.
Wow. So that went totally against him. I guess that's why a lot of people are reluctant to share their experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, did your grandmother see anything other than just the tracks?
The shadow in the window. And then it wasn't until much later when I started actually doing the research that my uncle had admitted. He's a Marine over in Japan. He's been there since 76 now. That he'd have been about 8 years old at the time, and he had gotten lost in the woods because they were on 200 acres out there. And at some point, he would start hearing footsteps behind him, and he would look, and he just described it as a large brown hairy man would pop out and look at him. and then pop back behind the tree. And then my uncle would keep moving, and it went on for 4 or 5 hours. And it followed him up until the point where he finally found the tree line to get home.
So you have a long line of relatives and community that you were invested in having some experiences with some kind of Bigfoot encounter.
Yeah.
So as you grew
Yeah.
older, did you have your own experiences?
When I was 16, my first sighting was 2 miles down the road from where she lived at the time. Um, it's a road, it's called 669, and a road attaches it to Elmira Road for anybody who wants to look on Google. And it comes from a straight, and then it makes a kind of a wide curve and goes uphill. And at the time, there was a guardrail. And I'm known for taking late night rides just to clear my head. And I was 16, and it was 1987 in June. I was having the typical, 16-year-old world ending problems with the girlfriend was mad at me for something. And I just needed to clear my head. So it was about 11 o'clock at night. And as I go around the corner, I looked, and I don't know why, but to me, it looked like a big 55-gallon bag of garbage on the road by the guardrail. And I thought, what the heck? And as I got closer, I noticed it had hair. And I thought, oh, that's a really big bear. But it didn't move. And being 16, I thought, oh, I'll make you move. We'll play a little game of chicken here. So I nudged as close as I could with my headlights on, and they were on high beam, and I had a 79 El Camino. And I got within 4 or 5 feet. This thing is not going to move. And inched just a little bit closer, and then that's when it stood up. And to my surprise, it actually squared off. It was on two legs, and the shoulders were literally as wide as my El Camino was wide. So from fender to fender was nothing but this huge mass of hair and muscle in front of me. And it was so tall, and I was close enough that the high beams actually cut off about mid chest. And it just stood there, but you could catch the eyes shine, and they looked like softball size and probably 3 or 4 inches apart. And I literally felt like it was just looking in my soul, because I'm looking at the eyes, and I'm actually got my head forward with trying to peep up out of the windshield. And after a few seconds, I went to hit the horn just to get it to move. And I call it what you want. To me, it was just kind of an internal feeling, but something told me as I'm going to hit the horn, don't hit that horn. It's going to be a really bad night for you. So I've got my hand over the horn, kind of like you see the contestants on Family Feud or Press Your Luck or something, ready to, hit the buzzer. And I just stopped, stood there for a few more seconds, and then it just turned to the left. And it was so big, it just stepped over the guardrail. It didn't have to hop. It didn't have to put its hand on it. It just literally stepped over the guardrail and was gone. And at first I'm like, oh my God, I saw Bigfoot. I saw Bigfoot. I can't wait to tell everybody. And as I'm turning around, it's 1987. It hits me. And I'm like, I can't tell anybody I saw this. They're going to wrap me in a coat and send me away forever if I tell anybody.
But you were close enough to it to get a pretty good visual of it. Can you describe the face to me?
I didn't see the face because of the fact that the way the headlights hit the chest. So, I mean, I can tell you from the chest down,
Mm-hmm.
the face wasn't that well illuminated. Like I said, all I could see with the eyes, but you could see the muscles ripple in the chest. It was black hair, but like brown highlights. And I'm a fairly big guy now. I'm 6 foot and I weigh about 250, weightlifter. And I actually went and sat in that same car because it's at a local junkyard. And you can just fit two of me inside. I'm shoulder to shoulder. And it was wider than that. And a polite way of saying this, you could tell it was a male. You could see genitalia, and it was just. I'd only been weightlifting for 2 years, and it was like I have never seen anything that big with that much muscle ever in my life. And the weirdest part was, as tall as it was, even next to in front of the car, I couldn't see the hands. The hands were just below. I could see down to about the wrist. So the arms were really long. And looking back, I'm fairly close. Normally if I look at a person, I could say, what are you, about a buck 60? And they're probably a buck 65 or a buck 55, give or take. And looking back, we were looking at 600 plus pounds easy.
Pretty good size one.
Yeah, it was. I was only a buck 65 at the time, so to me that was the most massive thing, and it's still why to this day I don't consider myself big. When I've seen something like that, it's like there's no way I can compare it to. I was 290 at a time, and good sized guy compared to standing next to another guy, but not compared to standing to something like that.
So how did you emotionally respond? Was it a scary experience or was it just startling? How did you emotionally respond to that?
Startled at first, and then excitement, because to me it was something that I already believed in. So it wasn't like it turned my world upside down. It was like, oh, holy crap, I got to see one. But because of the fact that it was so taboo, I didn't tell anybody about it until maybe 2017.
Well, that was a long time. So who did you decide to tell? How did you come out of the closet, so to speak, with your Bigfoot sighting?
I started getting into the Bigfoot forums online. There was a certain group um, on Facebook, Michigan's Bigfoot Data, and I joined that, and I wound up. There happened to be a guy from Benzie County, and he and I became friends, and we started exchanging information.
Did you feel like that was supportive of your encounter and vice versa, that the two of you could share similar experiences?
Yeah, because he knew some things about that area that I didn't. Uh, the fact that there is a store in Lake Ann, and they had a couple of Bigfoot tracks up on the wall. And I always just thought they were fake. They were interested in Bigfoot, didn't think anything of it. And, he's like, oh, you remember that store? And I'm like, yeah. He says, you remember the tracks? I'm like, of course. And he's like, those were real. And I'm like, no, they weren't. And he's like, yeah. He said, what happened was one came down off the hill, it tipped over the dumpster, and then went back up the hill, and they cast the two best tracks. I'm like, oh, holy crap, I didn't know that backstory. And then my aunt had an experience that I never knew about. And she actually showed me once I started talking about it, she showed me the newspaper clippings. And this was only 4 or 5 miles from where I had my sighting. So it's, just this nice local area in Lake Ann. And they'd been having chickens go missing. And so they, put a fenced in coop and uh, building and everything in there for the chickens, but they would still come up missing. So they got a big German Shepherd for a dog. One night they hear the dog go off and they hear this huge crash and go out, and something had stepped over their, chicken fence. And when the dog went ballistic, apparently it went to chase it, and it actually just blew through the other side of the building. And they had 8 or 9 tracks, and all my cousins even wound up getting tattoos of the tracks on their shoulders. But they had the state police there, they had the DNR there, the local police, they had the Record Eagle there. So, but she had never talked about it to me. So I was getting all this validation of not only did I see one there, but there were apparently quite a few of them there for quite a while.
Yeah, it sounds like a rather active area. Is the area still active?
It is, because my dream was to be able to go back onto that property. It had been sold, and the couple lives in Florida, so it's been really hard to reach out to them. But I wound up making friends with a neighbor whose property is adjacent to their property. And he started telling me stories. This was just last year I connected with him. And he's like, yeah, come on out. I've listened to your podcast. I know you're straight up and see what you think. He says, because my dog won't go outside at night now. He said, for the last 2 weeks, I've been hearing stuff back there and the dog won't go out at night. And sure enough, we go back there and, there's your typical, what looks like, could be X's and tree breaks and old imprints. And I said, well, would you mind if I put a recorder out? He's like, no, no, go ahead. So he watches me and I put out a digital recorder. I put it in the Ziploc bag. Uh, Ironically, I used Gorilla Tape, and put it on the tree. And we go back to get it 2 days later because he said he had heard some sounds. And so we go back there and I look and I'm like, the heck's the recorder at? I'm thinking, and I've had recorders disappear before, whether it's a squirrel or raccoon, who knows. But the tape was still on the tree and the bag was on the tree, but the recorder was gone. So I go up and I'm starting to trap around and look, and the owner's like, hey, wait, 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 hold up, hold up. I'm like, what? And he goes, you're stepping on the tracks, you dope. I'm like, what? And I looked down and there was a trail of 17-inch imprints in the leaves that had come out one side of the woods, gone right to the tree, and then proceeded to keep going. So I never did find the recorder.
Have you put recorders out there before that you got any kind of information from?
I did. I put one out at a location where I started. I say looking around. I don't call myself a researcher. I'm more of an enthusiast because I'm not very good at logging books and things like that. But I had put a recorder out and it wound up about, I think I put it out about 9 p.m. and then about 11 p.m. Uh, a friend of mine was listening to it because he's got all the sound analysis on his laptop. And he starts hearing what it's nowhere near as loud or as comprehensive as what Ron Moorhead got, but you can hear some like samurai chatter where you can hear some gibberish going on in the background. And then he said, all of a sudden you hear something like he hit his thumb or something because all of a sudden, it's and then bang, and then, and he said it goes on for, then you hear more banging and clicking going on, and it goes on for about 2 hours.
What do you think
So
Bigfoot is? How would you define them?
I used to draw a line in the sand and say absolutely flesh and blood. But as you know, once you start going down this rabbit hole, there's too many people seeing them do different things. And I know what it feels like to be discredited, saying, no, that can't happen, just from seeing Bigfoot. So um, I guess I would say they're flesh and blood, but with maybe innate abilities that we've forgotten over time. Because the Barb Shoot video is amazing with the cloaking, the fact that they can't reproduce that. I've had instances following, I followed the trail for about a quarter mile where they were consistent steps in this gravel, and then all of a sudden they're gone. Nowhere else for it to step where there's not, material for them to leave a track in, but it's just gone. So, and I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of stories about that. Now, when you saw the Bigfoot, and your headlights were right on that huge Bigfoot, um, did it seem like a flesh and blood creature to you?
Oh yeah, as soon as it, as soon as it moved, you could see muscles ripple. Because like I was really big into the bodybuilding thing. I never competed, but I became a judge, and even I started at 14. So at 16, I had 2 good years in it, and the size of the quads, the way that, after it turned, you could see that flax calf come up, and it was like, holy crap. I mean, his calf seemed like it was as big as my chest. It was just crazy. And then, and some of the stuff I've seen since then is just makes me realize how small I am and how big they are, and in awe of what they can do as far as like moving so silently. I've got, of course, everybody's got, blob squatch pictures, and the one I took once I started doing the research, um, knew something was following me, but every time I looked, nothing there. So I thought, you know what, let's just try this. So what I did was I took my phone and I took a bunch of selfies. And in one selfie, I catch what looks like one trying to stand side profile with his head cocked, because you can see the typical sagittal crest. You can see the brow ridge and the real dark eyes set back in. And then the top half from like maybe pecs up, standing there. And I thought, oh, I knew you were back there. It's like,
That's interesting. Um, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone just taking selfies like that before, but I have heard of people just going through the woods and they'll just start snapping shots, of whatever, and not really see anything, not even paying attention so much to what they're taking pictures of, and get home and look at them, and there is, something that's very evident.
yeah, I've got a few like that. There's one that's, um, I guess to give a little background to why I got these pictures was, I started doing at one point in 2019. Um, this was my second encounter with them. Was that friend of mine we'd been talking, and I told him I want to see another one just for me to confirm what I saw. And he's like, "Well, with where you live," he says, "right now, if you go to this area, it's a real hot spot." He said, "That's probably your best chance." And so I'm like, all right. And oddly enough, on my way there, I ran into a friend of mine, and I hadn't seen her in a decade. And she was coming out of the store, and she's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Let's get together. Let's go do something." I said, "Well, oddly enough, I'm going to go look for a Bigfoot." She goes, "Oh, you're an effing idiot. They don't exist." I'm like, "Well, if they don't exist, that's fine. But, I'm going to head out to these woods and I'm going to take a walk." And she was all for joining me. So we go, and this place is along Lake Michigan. And I park, and there was a service road down these woods. Trying to think, this was in February of 20, 2020. And so we start walking down, and you see on the shows that do the yells and the knocks and all that. And I'm like, I'm not doing any of that. There were two houses on the other side of the road. The other side of the road is conservancy. It's all, private. And so I would clap twice, and we'd probably walk a mile. Nothing's happening, which I expected. I expected to get scalped. No doubt in my mind. I was just hoping to find a track or something. And then I glanced up to my right, and it was a, how do I want to put it? It wasn't a steep incline, but there was an incline up a hill. And I knew it overlooked Lake Michigan. I thought, wow, that would be a good spot to kind of check what's going on and maybe see deer or something up there. And so I took a picture, and then I took two steps, and then whatever it was clapped twice back at me, which was what I would do, clap twice. But it sounded like two catcher's mitts hitting, and it was way faster than I could do. I mean, it was boom, boom, froze me in my tracks. I turned around and looked at my friend. She's pale. She's got tears in her eyes. And I said, it takes hands to clap, right? And she's like, yeah, I want to go home. And I'm like, I'm with you. And so we start walking back to the truck. And I don't know if they decided to just make sure we were leaving or celebrate the fact that they scared the crap out of us. But within just a couple steps, we got, a tree knocked behind us. And the farther we kept going, the more activity that picked up. Because maybe quarter of the way back, we had a couple whoops down bottom left, and then we had a tree knock to the right. And I'm thinking, oh, holy crap, they're paralleling us. And I don't know, you always hear they're cute and cuddly, but it's like you're in the woods, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I came upon babies or something. And so I'm getting a little nervous, and she's getting nervous. And we get about halfway back to the truck, and I had parked by a metal gate, and something begins shaking the crap out of that metal gate. I'm like, I'm cursing in my head, like, we're surrounded, we're screwed, we're done. This is not going to end well. And then we get three-quarters of the way back to the truck, and you can start hearing footsteps paralleling to the right up the hill. And I turn and look just in time to see him. It was 6.5 feet, but it jumped behind the tree. And I said, okay, you know what? You need to get in front of me. You need to keep moving. We need to get out of here. And so we get back to the truck, and sure enough, there's a bunch of 17-inch tracks around my truck by the gate. And we leave. Obviously made it out. I get to be here and talk to you about it. And I said, well, what do you think now? And she was, I believe they're real, and I don't know what to think.
I think a lot of
So,
people just have a really hard time accepting the idea that they are real unless they do have some form of an encounter.
yeah, that flipped her world upside down, and then she became absolutely obsessed with them because that was what started our, I call it the Peanut Butter Chronicles out there, which wound up leading to a confrontation with the DNR and everything. So,
Well, tell me about that. What happened?
what happened was it took me about 6 months before we got the courage to go back out there. And excuse me, sorry. Uh, at first, we just started, trying to look for signs, and we find the occasional. There's so much deadfall out there. There's really no place for good tracks, but we would find weird tree structures, some big X's. We found like a asterisk on the ground, but it would have been like 4 feet by 4 feet wide. That wasn't there the night before. We would try to make it out. I would make it out 3 to 4 times a week to go check. She might be able to get out there once or twice with me. And we would start noticing just weird little things because of the way the wind blows up off Lake Michigan. All the trees tend to break in a certain direction. But then all of a sudden you'd find one or two that are broken the opposite direction. And it's like, well, what caused that? And then in that same area, all of a sudden we noticed all the cherry trees were snapped off at about 8 feet. So, like, what the heck has a grudge against a cherry tree? But they were all snapped off equal height, and none of the other trees were touched. And so we started thinking of trying to think of ways we could know what was, or know as best we could what was happening. So we started leaving like little trinkets out there, putting rocks in certain places and see if they got moved. And, I had some rather humorous interaction, like where I had a rock with her name that had been painted that she gave me. She's like, well, put this out there. And I stuck it in one location, and we were walking around maybe 2 weeks later. And this was a mile away in a spot where I had left a honey bun. So it got moved that far, but then left. And one day, probably about a year into this, I had seen a picture somewhere, and I can't remember who had it, but there was a jar of peanut butter and what looked like a thumbprint in it. And I thought, well, heck, let's try that. So we started with smaller jars of peanut butter, and I would crack open it, pull the seal off it, put the lid back on, and almost immediately, jars would disappear, and we'd find jars that were opened and completely lit clean with, I mean, not even a sliver of peanut butter left. But we would also find a whole bunch of jars that you could tell the raccoons and possums or whatever else was out there because they were chewed. But then you would find the ones that there were no scratches whatsoever. But once I caught on, I happened to see, I couldn't figure out what it was because it looked like a mink or something running, and it had something shiny in its mouth. And I happened to look and catch it was a peanut butter jar. And I thought, oh, okay, well, so we graduated to the 4 pound peanut butter jars. And I started bungee cording to the trees. I would leave like colored popsicle sticks underneath the peanut butter jar. And you would go out there and you would find large imprints by the tree. Peanut butter jar would be gone. And then the colored popsicle sticks would be laid out by color on the ground. So I'd, leave 8 or 10 of them, 2 blue, 2 green, 2 red, whatever. And you would find them laid out on the ground. And you'd start walking around, and sure enough, you would find the label from the jar in one piece laying there. And then one of two things would happen. You'd either find the lid and then keep walking and find the jar, or you would find the jar with the lid screwed back on with no scratches, no bite marks, anything like that. So once that started happening, then we went all in, and we had 3 locations, and we were putting about 9 jars out a week because they would take them. And I mean, I've got dozens of these peanut butter jars here, only the ones that look interesting, not the ones that the raccoons chewed up on the spot or anything. But I've got one where it looks like 2 large fingers, like that oily, slimy substance you hear about on the jar, where it had been, the lid got screwed back on. And there was one time that everything I did was from the waist down because I'm a big guy and I don't like to climb trees. I'm afraid of heights. And one time I go out and the jar's gone from the crotch of the tree, and it had been, you could see peanut butter in the bottom of it, but the lid had been screwed back on and it was about 10 feet up. So I, had to climb and use a stick to knock that one down. And a lot of the times we would go out, and I don't want to exaggerate, but probably 25% of the time, if I went out and like would clap or something like that, if they were in the mood, you'd get a clap back or tree knocks. We didn't get a lot of vocalizations, but every other time, we could get a good tree knock as long as there weren't a bunch of people out in the woods. And footprints, I had an instance where I went to I was drinking a cream soda root beer. That's my treat for my diet, and left it on the bumper of my truck. Go to put a jar of peanut butter out in this one particular spot, and instead of clapping, I thought, you know what, I'm going to jingle my keys and see what happens. So I jingle my keys, and I hear what sounds like a bulldozer take off. And I get to the clearing by my truck just in time to see a big set of reddish brown Head and Shoulders go over the bluff. Like, oh, holy crap. And so I go by my truck, and sure enough, there were some imprints in the leaves. And I'm looking around, and I went, what the heck? My pop's gone. So apparently, I call him Big Red because I've seen him twice. Good shots of him twice. And the imprints weren't right by my bumper, so apparently he was curious about my cream soda and took it with him. when he left. Then the one night, this was the scariest encounter I think I've ever had, was when my friend and I had gone out that day, and it was had been snowing. I'd have to look at the picture to give you the exact month, but I had another friend. Her name was Shauna Lentz, rest in peace. She had stage 4 cancer and just wanted to go out. I said, you know what? I've got a caregiver tonight for my girlfriend. Let's go out to my Bigfoot spot because I want to see if there's any tracks since I put peanut butter out. And she's like, you're a freaking moron, but all right, let's just go. Because she was another skeptic and she thought I was an idiot the whole time. And there's logical explanations for how these peanut butter drips came back and, et cetera, et cetera. And as we're driving up the hill, where I normally park is exactly 1 mile back down a 2-track. And we got about maybe 500 or 600 feet. And the road was a sheet of ice, but you could see deer tracks coming down one side and then deer tracks going up the hill. And I happened to notice next to the deer tracks, there were 2 huge imprints. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, what? I said, Bigfoot tracks, Bigfoot tracks. And she goes, how do you know that? I said, because they're, I said, I'm guessing, but from here, they're huge. There's no kick marks, no drag marks in between them. I said, I want to go check this out. And she's like, all right. So I turned my truck with the headlights toward the woods, took a picture of it, and then turned the lights off on my truck. I said, okay, let's walk in, but let's make something out of this, and we'll do it in the dark. And so we started walking up this, small hill, and you could hear your typical, could be deer walking, you hear a crack, or maybe something brushing twigs. I didn't put a lot of stock in it. And then we get to the top of the hill, and just over the top, maybe 30 or 40 feet from it. And then we hear a loud tree snap. I mean, it was crack. And of course, I say the F word, and she says the F word. What the F was that? I'm like, I don't know. She goes, well, turn on the flashlight. So I hit the flashlight. And as soon as I do that, Big Red's standing there and pulls his arm up over his face. And I turn around to tell her to go, because obviously I'd be really mad if somebody hit me with a mag light right in the face with a flashlight. And you could see the hair on his arms. It was about 3 or 4 inches. It was that reddish brown that I had seen before out there. And as I turn around, he roars. I mean, it wasn't a whoop or sort of growl. It was a really angry roar. It actually vibrated. It was like being at a rock concert where you could just, like, through my coat, through my snow pants and everything. And I put my car keys in her hand and I say, go. If I'm not 30 seconds behind you, you go. And so she turns around. She only weighs $150 at the time. And, isn't moving fast enough for my taste. So I'm kind of picking her up and shoving her along. And, Big Red's behind, pacing us out, not chasing, looking back. It was just, but you could hear the thud, thud, thud in the snow. And just as we get to the truck, I get the passenger door open. As I pick her up to throw her in, I slip and I fall underneath my truck because the road is just a sheet of ice. So I'm trying to get out from under the truck. The pacing had stopped. It must have got right to that wood line at the top of the hill. So I'm scrambling, trying to get out from underneath it. And then my truck starts. I'm like, oh crap, she's serious, and luckily I was able, before she got it in gear, to bang on the side of the door And as I'm opening it, she jumped over to the passenger seat, and I didn't bother turning around. I backed down the hill, icy as it was. And we were both pretty silent for a minute. And we came to the Shell station in Frankfurt. I said, I need gas and then I want a drink. And she goes, no, 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 we can't. I'm like, why? And she goes, because I wet myself. Luckily, she was wearing snow pants. And she went inside, we got a plastic bag, put her wet clothes in that snow pants. And she was with me at that point. No, let's just go get a drink. I'll change it when I get home. And the next day I went back with the friend who goes with me Bigfooting. And luckily there were still some tracks there. So I took a picture of the tracks. If you zoom in, you can see the toes, and they're 23 inches. And I thought, you know what? I want to see what it takes. So what I did was I made sure I was in the right spot because there was a cable box on the hill. So I got as close as I could, and then I did my best to try to recreate those two steps. And the snow was a little over my knees, and it took me at 13 steps to recreate those two. And I'm pushing snow. There's no doubt that it's a person walking, where these were just print, print, and then into the woodline.
Well, that does sound like a rather intense experience. What time of day was it when you saw this?
That would have been somewhere between 11:30 and 12 o'clock at night.
So it was a late night experience for the two of you, pretty late.
Yeah, I don't get to go out very late, even past 5 o'clock, because um, my girlfriend and I, we've been together going on 12 years, and about she had MS when we got together, but about 2 years in, she became bedbound. So she's quadriplegic at this point. So I'm a caregiver 19 hours. Luckily, I had a caregiver that night. So that was the only reason I got to go out at night, because normally between 12 and 5 is the only break I get.
I understand. You mentioned something about an incident with like authorities or something that happened during that time of the Peanut Butter Chronicles. So, can you share that with us?
Yeah. So what happened was people had warned me not to do it because you'll get them in the habit. And if you stop, things can go bad. And what happened was I wound up having to have tricep surgery. I tore my tricep. And the friend of mine who goes said, "Oh yeah, I'll keep up. I'll keep up. We'll just put these markers up so I know exactly which trees we're going to again." And so 6 weeks goes by because I didn't want to take a chance on falling and tearing that tricep off in the woods. And we go back and pick up things as normal. And within a week of going back, uh, she gets a visit from the DNR, and they're saying, "We don't want to talk to you. We want to talk to Brian." And so she gave them my contact info. And what was the oddest part was, and I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but we have local offices where I go. I mean, there's a DNR office within half an hour of me. And yet they had a specialist come from Cadillac, which is an hour and a half away from me, to want to talk to me. And so I called her, and the conversation had started with something to the effect of, there are two houses on that road, the opposite side of the conservancy. And she says, well, there's an issue because, you're feeding these animals, and, there's the raccoons are becoming a problem. The possums are becoming a problem. The bears are becoming a problem because they're coming out of hibernation. And I said, bears? And she goes, yeah, the bears are the issue here. And so I asked her, I said, is this being recorded? And she goes, no, I didn't think we needed to do that. I said, okay. I said, I've been going there for, 2.5 years and I've never seen any sign of bear, not a scratch on a tree. I've never found any bear scat. I've never found a bear track. And bears don't leave 23-inch tracks and throw sticks at my truck. And she went, excuse me. And I said, no, let's go with the bears. And she says, well, the problem is, you are feeding the animals and technically you are littering because these peanut butter jars are showing up. And she says, we have all, we went out and we collected a bunch of them that we found. And um, so you need to, they don't want to kick you off the conservancy, but they do want you to stop feeding the bears. I'm like, okay, fine. Because, at the time I thought, man, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble for this. I don't know what could happen. So I'm scared. And she goes, I do like, I want to see your trail cams. And like everybody, in the Bigfoot world knows, you're not going to get them on a trail cam. So I never bothered putting them out. And I says, well, I don't have any trail cams. And she says, well, do you have anything on your phone? I kind of like to see the pictures on your phone. And I said, no, you're not. You'll have to go through all the legal trouble to get that. I'm not just handing my phone over to somebody. And she goes, well, okay. She says, but, here's the conditions. You go out, you clean everything up, and you quit this. I'm like, okay, fine. So what had happened was I was out there cleaning it up, making sure I could find every jar I could. Um, and there were several places where I had bungee cords, so I made sure I got all my bungee cords and stuff like that. Any marker I had, like I had one because I always had a hard time for some reason in the woods in this one area. I get turned around all the time, so I had a piece of bark with paint on it above a barrel that I would put peanut butter in. Even made sure I grabbed that. And as I came out, one of the neighbors knew what I was doing because we had talked at one point. And she comes out and they're in their mid 70s, retired. And she goes, I am so sorry that we had to call the DNR. And, I'm really sorry. And I'm like, well, why didn't you talk to me? Personally. And she says, well, let's face it, you're a big guy. We know you carry. We didn't know how you were going to take it. She said, because while you were sick, she said, after about 2 weeks, our motion lights kept coming on. And we couldn't figure out why we'd look out the window, but didn't see anything. So we watched the footage. And what happened was these peanut butter jars were come bouncing through our yard. And then we're setting off our motion lights. And I laughed at first, and she goes, no, that's not funny. That's scary to us because, we've been out here a long time. We know these things are here, but we've had a very peaceful time. She says, and this is what we were worried about and why we told you couldn't use our property. And then I felt kind of bad. I said, okay, yep. I says, well, I talked to the DNR and we're done. And she said, well, there is another incident that the people down the road who absolutely hate me because what I was doing. Apparently what had happened was this was 3 weeks into me being out of commission. And this is a hard one for me because what had happened was their daughter, who was 5 at the time, woke up screaming her head off. And dad goes in just in time to catch a pretty big Bigfoot staring in the window. And the window's, second story with just a slight hill for it to stand outside on. That one broke my heart because now, because of what I did, some little girl, who knows how long she's going to have nightmares for. So that was when they got together and decided that they needed to get the DNR involved because obviously there was going to be times I missed and they didn't want to be going through this. So, the cycle had to stop somehow. And after that happened, it sounds weird and stuff, but I went back out and the next week I was still trying to find any peanut butter jars that might turn up, because those peanut butter jars would disappear for months at a time and then turn back up. All of the other part of the phone call too was, when she said after the fact that, we agreed to stop, and she goes, well, we got, a bunch of these peanut butter jars here. Technically, they're yours. She says, do you want them back? And I'm still pretty nervous at this point, not knowing what to expect. And I said, well, what kind of shape are they in? And she goes, well, there's a lot of them chewed up and stuff. And she says, but I do have a personal question because I'm curious. She says, why would you put one date on the top and then a different date on the bottom of the jars? And I went, what? And she goes, well, we've got jars here where the lid's on it and there's one date on the top, but it's a different date on the bottom. And I kind of chuckled and said, oh, it must have been the bears. And I says, no, I don't need those back. I got plenty of them. But where those dates came in was about halfway through. What I would do was, because I had 6 different locations I was putting peanut butter in, so I would know where the jars and lids came from. I would put, I'm just going to throw a date out, and the fact that I mentioned the burn barrel. So I would put 12/6 barrel on top and bottom. So that way, if I found a jar or a lid, I knew which one, where it came from. So the fact that they found jars with the lids on, but 2 different dates, kind of supported to me that the fact that for some reason they were holding on to them and then just deciding to put them out, but they would turn around and have those had a different date on the lid and the bottom. So they had to hold on to them for some period of time. But, I made a promise that I wouldn't do any more feeding. And ever since then, I've kept my promise, because the activity got so bad out there that the people wound up selling their house. So there's new people living at the bottom of that hill now.
Had they had any experience seeing Bigfoot at all?
I haven't talked to them. I'm too afraid to, because if they don't know about it, and nothing's happened, that's a good thing. And I don't want to terrorize somebody, or at the same time have them get so mad at me that who knows what could happen in these days.
Did the DNR ever indicate that that they believed you that it wasn't a bear, it was a Bigfoot?
I could not get her to say Bigfoot to save my life. I tried every trick I could to get her, especially when I said something about the 23-inch tracks and stuff. It's like, they asked me if I was trying to trap porcupine, because apparently the Native Americans use porcupine quills for something. And I said, did you ever see a trap out there? And they're like, well, no. I said, well, how would I trap them? So she says, well, just this has to stop, or they're going to kick you off that property.
Well, it's interesting. So anything else you can share with us?
I do keep going back, and I've talked to a couple friends of mine, because what happened that was weird this summer was we went out one weekend, and it had been a while, and the usual stuff was there. And the very next weekend we went out, all the old stuff was gone. All the tree structures were gone. There was a place we called the Cradle that had been totally wiped out. And there were newer, bigger structures there. So that area, something changed out there, that's for sure. I didn't get to go out very much this year because I've had to deal with cancer and some other neurological issues. But there is a story from April 2024 where the friend that had told me about that location said, hey, there's something going on. And I'll put this out there because this is a well-known hotspot for people. Tippy Dam on the Manistee River. He had a friend tell him that the week before, he and his buddy were out night fishing, uh, by an island in the middle, just down from the dam, and they heard what they thought were fishing, because they heard splash and nothing. They kept fishing, splash, but a little closer, nothing, and then bam, a rock right in their boat. So as soon as that happened, they started a motor up and heard a loud scream, so they left. So my friend and I go out the next weekend, and this one got really sketchy because we're walking and we can see your typical X signs along this path, and it's right at the top of the hill on, I don't know, north, south, east, and west. But if you're facing the dam, looking upriver, it would be the right hand side. And so we're walking along this path, and I look down to my left. I'm like, what is that, an old log cabin or something? And he looked and he's like, no, because there were huge trees. They were still under the canopy of the evergreens, but it looked like a log cabin, and they were stacked three high. And it made like a triangle with an open end. And I'm like, I'm sitting there trying to figure that out. And then we hear a knock. So my friend knocks back, and then we get another knock, and he knocks back. I'm like, what the heck? And then it starts getting rhythmic. I'm like, oh, it's a woodpecker. And he goes, I don't think so. And I'm looking around and trying to see, because the replies were, they got loud for a second and they were off to the distance. So I was looking around, and then he uses an expletive and says, there's babies down there. I'm like, baby what? And he goes, dude, there's baby Bigfoot down there. We're in trouble. And I didn't see the ones down the hill, but within a few seconds, there was would have been a knock to our left, another knock in the middle, and then a whistle to the right, and they were close. Um, and he's like, we got to go. We're going to be a statistic on that website. And so we start walking, and we can hear another knock and heavy footsteps and another whistle. And we both turn around and start snapping pictures. And I see probably a good 7-footer as he's walking. His shoulders are facing me as he walks behind a tree. But my friend took a picture of a bigger one, that's brown, doing your typical tree peak, but he's got his arm based on the tree so you can see, and the legs sticking out so you can see the whole right side from about mid thigh out. And it was to the point where he and I both, I text my girlfriend and he texts his wife. He says, if you don't hear from us within 30 minutes, here's our GPS. And so we kept walking, and they got within 30 yards. And we get to the parking lot. Everything seemed okay. We're both making phone calls. And then all of a sudden there were more knocks and branches being broke, and you could see shadows walking back and forth. Like, we weren't, you guys need to leave, not just leave the woods. So I do actually have a pretty darn good picture of a huge brown one doing a tree peak, and his arm is freaking huge. So that was a different area. That's the Tippy Dam in Manistee. And when we had walked in, we were both looking for signs. But on the way out, there was, I would call it a 4 or 5 foot. I call it a log, but it's probably maybe an 8-inch piece of tree that had been broke on both ends. And it was hanging right next to you hear about those, they call them hangers, where they're straight across, hanging straight across perfectly, not up or down on either end. And there was one of those. So I called a couple friends of mine, and one of them said, that's a sign, buddy, that this is how big we are. We know how big you are. If you come back, it's not going to be the log in the tree. It's going to be you. So I never went back there.
Don't blame you. Sounds like that was another kind of scary encounter.
Yeah, the black one was big, but when he showed me the picture of the brown one, I was like, oh,
A lot bigger. Yeah. Well, Brian, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been fun. I really appreciate your sharing the stories with us and all of your interest and experiences from the time you were quite young.
oh, I appreciate it because the only reason why I went public with this to begin with was the fact that to tell people don't feed them, don't do what I did, because it's going to be other people who wind up suffering the consequences. So that was the only reason I originally came out. I went on somebody had been talking on Facebook about the dangers, and I said, yeah, this is what happened to me. And they're like, well, would you come on and talk about it? And I'm like, sure.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I think I'm glad you did. It does help us to understand more about how to approach Bigfoot research with a sense of awareness and to do it in a way that doesn't get in the way of other people's pleasure of just existing.
Exactly. I mean, it wasn't my property. I should have heeded people's word and not done it.
Yeah, yeah. But we live and learn, and that's how we grow. But I do appreciate you sharing your story and all the information that you gave us. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
And we will talk to you later on and maybe have you back on the show.
Well, thank you. That'd be great.
And I want to thank the audience as well. Thank you for watching the Linda Eastburn YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, share if you like this show, let other people know about it. And also, I want to remind everyone that Threshold to Encounters, my book about Bigfoot, is also still available on Amazon.com. Thanks for watching.